How's it going, everybody? My name is Anthony Miranda. I'm a licensed and practicing attorney in the state of California, and today I'm going to be breaking down California laws in regards to large capacity magazines. So for a lot of you individuals in California, I'm sure there's a lot of questions in regards to what type of magazines you're permitted to have versus not permitted to have, what type of magazines you're permitted to use versus not use. So since we were allowed to purchase these magazines for a period of time, and then now you're potentially hearing, well, you're not allowed to purchase this anymore, you might have some confusion about what you're allowed to do versus what you're not allowed to do. Is it legal to have these magazines in your possession? And so I'm going to be covering that real quick, and then I'm going to address some general questions that you might have, more specific questions that I've seen pop up here and there about what we're allowed to do versus what we're not allowed to do after all this went down. So as a quick reference point, the major change that's occurred recently in California law, or potential change that's going to take place in California law, has to do with California Penal Code 32310. So California Penal Code 32310 primarily deals with the manufacturing, sale, purchase of large capacity magazines, and specifically parts A and B talk about those specific things: manufacturing, possession, sale, and essentially just says that you are prohibited in general from doing that sort of things with what California defines as large capacity magazines. And so part C of California Penal Code 32310 deals with the punishment. Essentially, it's $100, I believe, of each magazine, and then it's also punishable by a misdemeanor. So essentially in California, the definition of a large capacity magazine is any magazine that has the capacity to hold 10 or more rounds. So what happened recently, actually a few months back, was there's a case pending before California District Judge, and this judge essentially issued a decision finding that California 32310 and the restriction on possession of magazines is essentially unconstitutional. His ruling was that it's unconstitutional, and since it was found to be unconstitutional, that statutory language no longer applied to citizens of California, and that's when we got that whole Freedom Week. And specifically, this was a decision by Judge Benitez in the federal court, who found that this specific restriction on magazines was unconstitutional in violation of the Second Amendment. So for a quick reference point, I have this hex mag here. This may look like a 30-round magazine, but it's just actually a 10-round magazine. So for a long time in California, unless I was a law enforcement agent or before this actual statutory language went into effect, I had purchased a standard capacity magazine, I was restricted to only purchasing 10-round magazines like this hex mag. But when Judge Benitez actually found that this statutory language was unconstitutional, all of the citizens of California were able to go and get these bad boys, which a lot of you in other states, if you're watching this, you're probably like, this is stupid, but it was a big deal for us because we could just go online like you and purchase these standard P-mags from, Gun Mag Warehouse or any of these, Brownells, any of these sellers. We could go onto their website and purchase these without committing a misdemeanor. And this was a big deal for us. So a lot of you already know that you were allowed to buy these magazines during that run. So what actually happened was the AG's office, or the DOJ Becerra's office, sought a temporary stay of the decision. And what this did is it stayed the ruling on parts A and B of the penal code I referenced previously, which meant that we could no longer, after this week-long period, and there was actually like a 5 o'clock deadline on a Friday that was put, like you couldn't, after that 5 o'clock, you could no longer do it. And because essentially the stay went in order at 5 o'clock. And so it made it so that A and B, the decision that Judge Benitez put forward, was stayed. That old language was put back into effect. The ruling finding that A and B were unconstitutional was stayed, and therefore the old language still went back into application because for that 1 week period it was no longer applicable. So actually important with the issuing of the stay, Part C and D of that penal code I referenced earlier was not stayed. So Part C and D specifically deal with the punishment and all that deal with the possession of large capacity magazine. Essentially, that part of the statute was not stayed, and so you can still legally possess these magazines which you purchased during that week. You are not committing a misdemeanor for possessing these. And you can actually see this in the DOJ letter that was sent, was written by the California DOJ and was sent out to law enforcement agencies, essentially saying that anyone in possession of these large capacity magazines that we purchased during this Freedom Week period, we are in lawful possession of these, and we can't be subject to misdemeanors or confiscation, any of those things. So I'll actually put a link in the details down below with this DOJ letter. It's kind of cool to have. I would recommend maybe just have it on you or have a copy just in case something would ever happen. You know, it's a good safety net just in case you run across some law enforcement agency, or maybe you go to a local range with one of these magazines that you lawfully purchased, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, you can't have those, it's illegal, you can't use them. You can say, well, I actually have a letter sent out sent out to law enforcement agencies by the California DOJ saying I am allowed to lawfully possess these and I can use them. So now that we kind of got the primary, history and statutory language and all that kind of gives the background for what kind of happened in California and where we're at right now, I'm going to answer some specific questions that some of you might have. Again, I am a licensed practicing attorney in the state of California, but this is no way legal advice. If you have any specific questions or something specific to you, I recommend you seek legal advice. Don't take this as legal advice. This is just general education. So the first question is, can you still purchase these large capacity magazines or standard capacity magazines? And the short answer is no. As of 5 p.m. on April 5th, I believe it is, we are no longer permitted to purchase these large capacity magazines as they are defined in California. It's a no-go. You will violate parts A and B of that penal code that I referenced previously. So second question, can you lawfully possess these large capacity magazines that you purchased during Freedom Week? And the short answer is yes. Specifically, as I referenced earlier, the California DOJ letter that went out to law enforcement. So it did not stay the ruling on parts C and D. We are still allowed to lawfully possess these magazines that we purchased during that period. So the third question someone might have is, can I use these magazines that I lawfully purchased during this period at a gun range? And the short answer is yes, you can use these magazines that you lawfully purchased at a gun range. Like I said, you're lawfully allowed to possess these, and the possession aspect of it permits you to go to a gun range and use it. Like I said, I recommend maybe printing out a copy of the DOJ letter that went out. It just gives you extra validation if anybody at a range ever gave you issue. Another question you might have is, can I lawfully carry these magazines that I purchased during this period? Obviously, I don't think you're going to be carrying this. It's not like you're carrying an AR concealed. But for example, I bought some 15-round Glock magazines, and there was I had some confusion. Well, am I allowed to lawfully carry these magazines that I bought during this period? And the short answer is yes, with a caveat of check your local authorities' decisions on what type of magazines you are allowed to carry under your CCW. A lot of local agencies and some of these city and county agencies, by ordinance and by other rules, might restrict the capacity of magazine that you are permitted to carry on you with your CCW. So that's just a quick breakdown of the California laws in regards to magazines. Hope that information was helpful to you guys. If you have any specific questions, put them down in the description below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Again, this is not legal advice, it's just meant to be education for you guys. I know a lot of you don't want to go through all the documents. You don't want to read the DOJ letter. You don't want to read Benitez ruling. You don't want to read about the request for the injunctions. You don't want to read all that. So my goal is to condense that as easy and as concise as I can, that's easily digestible for you guys, so you can go away generally knowing what you're allowed to do versus what you're not allowed to do. So thanks you guys again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.